Revelation 10 contains the vision of the rainbow angel. The vision begins, "And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. And he had in his hand a little book open, and he set his right foot upon the sea, and his left foot on the earth, and cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roareth. And when he had cried, 7 thunders uttered their voices." The rainbow angel represents Christ and the redeemed in immortal power. In the vision, heaven represents their authority and position as rulers. The vision speaks of Christ and the redeemed setting out from a position of authority to establish the kingdom. The 7 thunders may allude to 7 campaigns fought by King David. But, as this video will show, the vision of Revelation 10 also alludes to David's friend, Jonathan. Jonathan was a mighty warrior, and in this respect he pointed forward to Christ as the rainbow angel. Before we consider Jonathan himself, we need to consider the rainbow in the Old Testament, or more accurately, the bow in the Old Testament. In Hebrew, the word for a rainbow is the same word as the word for a bow used by an archer. On the screen are 2 verses where the same Hebrew word occurs, indicated by the Strong's number. In Genesis 9 verse 13, the word refers to a rainbow. In Zechariah 9 verse 13, it refers to an archer's bow. In this verse, Judah is represented as God's bow. So both aspects of the bow, the rainbow and the archer's bow, relate to the work of God. The words of Paul, "Behold therefore the goodness and severity of God," neatly sum up the 2 spiritual aspects of the Hebrew word for bow. The rainbow speaks of the goodness of God, the archer's bow speaks of his severity. As we will now see, Ezekiel 5 provides an example of where there seems to be an allusion to the double meaning of the word. The word Noah is related to the word Nakam, which means comfort. The word Noah also plays on the word Nuach, which means rest. Ezekiel 5 verse 13 contains both the word for comfort and rest, directing our thoughts back to Noah. "Thus shall my anger be accomplished, and I will cause my fury to rest upon them, and I will be comforted, and they shall know that I, Yahweh, have spoken it in my zeal, when I have accomplished my fury in them." When God's righteousness has been declared through his judgments, then God is comforted. This was an aspect of the comfort which came in the days of Noah, for the flood was an example of when the fury of God rested upon the wicked and was accomplished. But then, in verse 13, arrows are used to represent how God's fury will be accomplished in the days of Ezekiel. "When I shall send upon them the evil arrows of famine, which shall be for their destruction, and which I will send to destroy you, and I will increase the famine upon you, and will break your staff of bread." God, as it were, uses his bow to fire the arrows of famine upon the wicked. With this background, we are now in a position to consider Jonathan. In 2 Samuel 1 verses 17 and 18 we read, "And David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son. Also he bade them teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Jasher." In fact, in verse 18 the words "the use of" are not in the original text, as indicated by the italics in the AV. So the verse should read, "Also he bade them teach the children of Judah the bow." Some suggest that bow is a name for the lament. Whether or not this is the case, these opening words highlight the bow. And then, in verse 22, the bow is mentioned again, this time specifically in relation to Jonathan. "From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty." So a bow is mentioned at the beginning of the lament and in the middle of the lament. Jonathan's bow in particular is mentioned. Jonathan seems to have had a preference for using the bow because he used it as a signal to David, as we read in 1 Samuel 20. "And I will shoot 3 arrows on the side thereof, as though I shot at a mark." Having established that the bow, at least the bow of the archer, is closely associated with Jonathan, we will now consider some links between the scriptural record concerning him and Revelation 10. When Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines at Geba, Saul blew the trumpet. The sounding of the trumpet announced a victory, albeit ascribing it to Saul, and it was also a means of calling the people together at Gilgal, as it is written in 1 Samuel 13, verses 3 and 4. And Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. And Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, Let the Hebrews hear. And all Israel heard say that Saul had smitten the garrison of the Philistines, and that Israel also was had in abomination with the Philistines. And the people were called together after Saul to Gilgal. In Revelation 10, the period of time during which the kingdom will be formed falls under the time period initiated by the sounding of the seventh trumpet, a time period which began with the French Revolution. Just as Israel were called together when Saul blew the trumpet, so the period of the seventh trumpet witnesses the final gathering of God's people, when the invading nations will be defeated and the kingdom will be established. In another attack against the Philistines, we read in 1 Samuel 14 verse 13, And Jonathan climbed up upon his hands and upon his feet, and his armour-bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armour-bearer slew after him. This verse speaks of Jonathan advancing on his feet, and in Revelation 10 verse 1 the feet of the rainbow angel are mentioned, it being stated that his feet were as pillars of fire. And in the next verse the location of each foot is specified, and he set his right foot upon the sea and his left foot on the earth. The attack by Jonathan against the Philistines was typical of Christ and the saints when they will fight against the nations at Armageddon. Later, in 1 Samuel 14, Jonathan put forth the end of the rod that was in his hand and dipped it in a honeycomb. And in Revelation 10, the angel had in his hand a little book open. But when John ate this, he said, It was in my mouth, sweet as honey. Revelation 10 verse 6 says, And swear by him that liveth for ever and ever, who created heaven and the things that therein are, and the earth and the things that therein are, and the sea and the things which are therein, that there should be time no longer. As the table shows, this verse draws heavily on the language found in 1 Samuel 20, where David and Jonathan part after having made an oath. In the final table we see, including the bow and rainbow, the links between David's lament and Revelation 10.